The richest man in Chicago stood on the front steps of his mansion, watching his 5-year-old son run barefoot into the snow, screaming, crying, begging a poor young woman not to leave. "Amelia, don't go. Please don't leave me. I'll be good." The boy slipped, fell, got up again. His small hand stretched toward her like she was the only person left in his world. And the woman, she didn't turn around. Because if she did, she knew she would never have the strength to walk away. That morning, the most powerful mafia boss in the city realized something terrifying. He hadn't just fired a nanny. He had just broken his own child's heart. If stories about love, sacrifice, and the quiet power of kindness touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Every day, we share stories that remind us what truly matters. Now let me take you back to where this story really began. Amelia Brooks didn't grow up poor. She grew up forgotten. Her first memory wasn't of toys or birthdays. It was of standing at a dusty window in a small town outside Springfield, Illinois, watching her mother walk away down the road. No hug, no goodbye, no explanation. Just a woman disappearing into the distance while a 3-year-old girl cried until her voice turned hoarse. Her father never recovered from that day. Richard Brooks was a quiet mechanic before his wife left. Afterward, he became a man who lived at the bottom of a bottle. Every night he drank. Every night he shouted. And many nights he hit. Amelia learned how to be silent. She learned how to hide. Closets, under beds, behind the house in the freezing dark. She learned something no child should ever learn: how to make herself invisible. By the time she was 12, she cooked, cleaned, did laundry, and took care of the man who frightened her more than the world outside. She didn't have friends. She didn't have childhood. She had survival. When she was 16, her father died from liver failure. Years of alcohol had finally taken everything he had left. Amelia stood beside the hospital bed and watched him take his last breath. And she didn't cry. She didn't feel relief. She didn't feel grief. She felt nothing. With no relatives and nowhere to go, she was sent to St. Mary's Orphanage. If she thought life would get easier there, she was wrong. Kids avoided her, whispered behind her back, "The drunk's daughter." But Amelia didn't fight. She had already lived through worse. At 18, she left the orphanage with $200, a small bag of clothes, and one quiet promise to herself. One day, she would build a life where no child felt unwanted. She took a bus to Chicago. The city didn't welcome her. It tested her. She waited tables in diners where customers barely looked at her. She washed dishes until her hands cracked. She cleaned office buildings at night when everyone else had gone home. And somehow, she still went to community college during the day. Some nights she slept 3 hours. Some days she ate once. But she never quit. Because her dream was simple. She wanted to become a preschool teacher, and one day open a small school for children like her. Children who needed kindness more than anything else. At 22, she graduated. That same year, she met Daniel. He had a warm smile, easy charm, and the kind of attention that made Amelia feel seen for the first time in her life. They dated for 3 years. She thought she had finally found love. She was wrong. Daniel had a gambling problem. Quiet at first, then desperate. He borrowed money in secret, used her name on papers she didn't understand. And one day, he disappeared, along with her savings, along with her trust. And he left her drowning in debt. By 25, Amelia had lost everything again. She sold what little she owned and moved into a run-down apartment on the edge of the city. The walls were damp. The heat barely worked. Rats scratched inside the ceilings at night. But she worked, and worked, and worked. 2 years passed that way. Then one cold morning, scrolling through job listings on her phone, she saw something that made her stop breathing. Live-in nanny needed. Salary: $5,000 per month. $5,000. That was more than she earned in 3 months. The address was in the Gold Coast, one of the richest neighborhoods in Chicago. Amelia read the listing again and again. She didn't know it yet. That single job posting would change her life, because behind the gates of that mansion lived a wealthy widower whose heart had turned to stone, and a little boy who hadn't truly smiled since his mother died. Across the city, inside a quiet office filled with shadows, Caleb Thornton sat alone at his desk. On the table in front of him was a photograph. A beautiful blonde woman. A laughing toddler in her arms. Catherine and Ethan. The picture had been taken 1 week before the accident that killed her. To the public, Caleb Thornton was a successful CEO. But in Chicago's underworld, people whispered his name with fear. Power. Money. Influence. He had built everything from nothing. And none of it mattered anymore. Because the only person who ever loved him for who he was gone. And the son she left behind? Caleb couldn't even look into the boy's eyes without seeing her. So he buried himself in work. 18-hour days. Late nights. Distance. And little Ethan was growing up in a house full of wealth, but empty of warmth. Nannies came and went. 1 month. 2 months. 3. Every one of them said the same thing. This child doesn't need money. He needs his father. But Caleb didn't listen. Until the day a quiet application landed on his desk. Name: Amelia Brooks. Age: 27. No family. And when the housekeeper looked at the photo attached, she whispered softly, "This girl knows what it means to suffer." And a week later, Amelia Brooks stood outside the iron gates of the Thornton estate, her hands shaking, about to walk into the world of the very rich, a world that would soon test her heart in ways she never imagined. The iron gates opened slowly with a quiet mechanical hum. Amelia took a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding and stepped inside. The driveway curved through a courtyard blanketed in clean white snow. The mansion ahead didn't look like a house. It looked like something from a movie. Tall white columns, wide glass windows, stone steps leading to doors that probably cost more than anything she had ever owned. For a moment, she felt very small. Not just poor. Out of place. A tall man in a black suit approached her before she could reach the steps. His expression was calm but watchful, the kind of look that measured people without saying a word. "Miss Brooks?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded once. "This way." He led her inside. The warmth hit her first. Then the silence. Marble floors. Crystal chandeliers. Paintings in heavy gold frames. Everything looked expensive, polished, perfect, and empty. There was no laughter. No television playing. No sound of a child running through the halls. The house didn't feel lived in. It felt frozen. She was guided down a long hallway and into a large study lined with dark wood shelves filled with books. And behind a wide desk sat Caleb Thornton. Amelia had expected someone older. Maybe heavier. Maybe louder. But the man in front of her looked younger than she imagined. Mid-30s. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair brushed back neatly, and eyes that were cold enough to stop a person mid-step. He didn't stand, didn't smile, didn't offer a greeting. "Sit," he said. His voice was calm, controlled, not rude, just distant. Amelia sat across from him, keeping her back straight even though her heart was racing. He picked up a folder and flipped it open. "I read your file," he said. 27. No family. Grew up in an orphanage. Worked multiple low-income jobs. Degree in early childhood education. His eyes lifted to hers. You've had a hard life. It wasn't sympathy. It sounded like a fact. Amelia didn't answer. Caleb continued. You should understand something before we go any further. This is not a normal job. He leaned back slightly. My son lost his mother 2 years ago. Since then, he doesn't talk to strangers. He doesn't trust easily. And he doesn't get attached unless he feels safe. A pause. Most people don't last here more than a few months. Amelia swallowed. I'm not most people, she said quietly. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth. Interest. He studied her for a long moment. Then he asked, Why do you want this job? Amelia hesitated. She could say the truth. The money. The debt. The chance to survive. But that wasn't the whole truth. I know what it feels like, she said softly. What does? To grow up feeling like no one's there for you. The room went very still. I don't just want a job, she continued. I want to help him feel safe again. Caleb didn't respond right away. Finally, he closed the file. You start Monday, he said. That was it. No handshake. No smile. The interview was over. Outside the study, an older woman was waiting. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, and her eyes were kind in a way that immediately made Amelia feel less alone. I'm Maggie, she said gently. I run the house. Her voice lowered as they walked down the hall. Don't take Mr. Thornton's tone personally. He wasn't always like this. They stopped at the bottom of a staircase. He loved his wife very much, Maggie added quietly. When she died, something in him shut down. Amelia nodded. She understood that kind of silence. Maggie led her upstairs and opened a door at the end of the hallway. This is Ethan's room. The space was beautiful. Pale blue walls. Shelves filled with toys. Model airplanes hanging from the ceiling. But the toys looked untouched. And on the small bed in the corner sat a little boy. He was smaller than Amelia expected. Dark hair. Big blue eyes. Eyes that looked too serious for a child. He was holding an old teddy bear close to his chest. Ethan, Maggie said softly. This is Amelia. She's going to help take care of you. The boy didn't answer. Didn't smile. He just watched Amelia carefully. The way a child watches someone who might disappear at any moment. Maggie gave Amelia a quiet, encouraging look before stepping out and closing the door. The room felt very quiet. Amelia didn't walk toward him right away. She remembered what Caleb had said. Don't rush him. So instead, she sat down on the floor a few feet away and reached into her bag. She pulled out a notebook and a box of colored pencils. Without looking at him, she started drawing. A big dragon with wide wings. After a moment, she spoke softly, almost like she was talking to herself. This is Draco, she said. He's the strongest dragon in the whole world. No response. He can fly higher than the clouds, she continued. And he can breathe fire hot enough to melt mountains. She kept coloring slowly. But he has a secret. Silence. He's afraid of mice. A small shift on the bed. Amelia kept her eyes on the drawing. Every time he sees a mouse, he hides behind a rock. A long pause. Then a tiny voice behind her asked, Why? Amelia's hand stopped for just a second. She didn't turn around. Because when Draco was little, she said gently, a mouse bit his tail while he was sleeping. It hurt him. So now he remembers. Another pause. Then the boy asked quietly, Does he have a mommy? That question hit her straight in the chest. Amelia swallowed before answering. "He did," she said softly, "and she loved him very much." Silence filled the room. Then she heard the sound of small feet. A tiny hand touched her shoulder. When Amelia finally turned around, Ethan was standing there, holding his teddy bear, his eyes wet. "Can you draw one for me?" he asked. And in that quiet moment, something small and fragile began to open. Down the hallway, Maggie watched from around the corner, pressing her hand gently over her heart. Because for the first time in months, she had heard Ethan speak, and she whispered under her breath, "Maybe this girl really was sent here for a reason." Amelia smiled gently and turned the notebook toward him. "Of course," she said. "What kind of dragon do you want?" Ethan hesitated, clutching his teddy bear a little tighter. "One that's not scary," he whispered. "One that's nice." Amelia nodded and began to draw again. "This one protects people," she said softly as her pencil moved. "He stays close to the ones he loves so they never feel alone." Ethan slowly sat down beside her on the floor. Not too close at first. Just close enough to see. That was how it started. Not with big changes. Not with laughter or hugs. Just quiet moments on the floor, colored pencils scattered between them, and a little boy who finally stopped turning his face toward the wall. Over the next few days, Amelia never rushed him. She didn't force conversation. She didn't overwhelm him with attention. She stayed nearby. When he played, she sat close enough to reach but far enough to let him feel in control. When he ate, she didn't insist. She simply ate with him and talked about small things. "The macaroni today looks better than yesterday," she'd say casually. Yesterday it looked like yellow glue. Sometimes Ethan didn't answer. But sometimes the corner of his mouth moved. At night, when he struggled to sleep, she sat beside his bed and told him quiet stories. Stories about Draco the dragon. Stories about clouds that carried messages. Stories about a mommy in the sky who watched over her little boy every night. One evening, as she tucked the blanket around him, Ethan's small voice asked, "Do you think she can see me?" Amelia paused. "Yes," she said gently. "I think she sees you every day. Even when I cry? Especially then." Ethan thought about that for a long moment before turning onto his side. That night, he fell asleep without calling out. Downstairs, Maggie wiped tears from her eyes in the kitchen. Because the house sounded different. Quieter. But warmer. Weeks passed. Ethan began to eat more. Talk more. Smile more. One morning, he ran into the kitchen while Amelia was making breakfast. "Amelia, I'm hungry." He froze after saying it, as if surprised by the sound of his own voice. Amelia turned slowly. "Amelia?" she repeated softly. Ethan nodded, suddenly shy. "That's what I want to call you." Amelia knelt down and pulled him into a gentle hug. "You can call me whatever makes you feel safe," she whispered. From the staircase above, Caleb stood unseen. He had come down early that morning for a meeting call. Instead, he found himself watching his son wrapped around Amelia's waist, laughing. It was a sound he hadn't heard in a very long time. Something inside his chest shifted. Not a big change. Just a crack. But cracks were where light began to enter. Over the next 3 months, the mansion slowly came back to life. Ethan talked constantly about dragons, clouds, and Amelia's stories. He started sleeping through the night. He stopped hiding from strangers. And every evening, Amelia sat beside his bed, singing soft little melodies she made up on the spot. She didn't know many songs. But her voice was warm. And steady. And safe. Caleb began coming home earlier. At first, he stayed in his office. Then he started standing in the hallway outside Ethan's room, listening quietly. One night, he heard Amelia say. "Whenever Ethan laughs, Mommy smiles up in the clouds." A small voice asked, "Does she know I miss her?" "Yes," Amelia said softly. "And she's proud of how brave you are." Caleb turned away quickly, his jaw tightening. Because for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't the only one carrying his son's grief. Someone else was helping hold it. Then winter hit hard. In the middle of February, a deep cold settled over Chicago. One night, as Amelia tucked Ethan into bed, she felt something wrong the moment her hand touched his forehead. He was burning. Within hours, a fever took over. Red spots began spreading across his skin. The doctor confirmed it quickly. "Chicken pox. He has a weak immune system," the doctor warned. "Watch him closely." Amelia called Caleb. No answer. She called again. Voicemail. Maggie told her he was in New York for a major business deal. He wouldn't be back for at least 10 days. Amelia didn't complain. She simply went back upstairs. For 5 nights, she barely slept. When the fever rose, she cooled him with warm cloths. When the itching became unbearable, she sat beside him, gently holding his hands so he wouldn't scratch. When he cried in his sleep and whispered for his mother, Amelia pulled him carefully against her shoulder. "Mommy's watching you," she murmured. "She's sending stars down to keep you strong." She slept on the floor beside his bed, wrapped in a thin blanket, waking at the smallest movement. Her back ached. Her eyes burned. But she never left his side. On the 3rd night, Maggie quietly opened the door and froze. Amelia was sitting on the floor, her head resting against the bed, one hand still holding Ethan's small fingers. She had fallen asleep like that. But even in sleep, she hadn't let go. Maggie stepped inside, gently placed another blanket over Amelia's shoulders, and walked out wiping her eyes. Because she had seen many nannies come and go. But this girl wasn't working for a paycheck anymore. She was loving that child like he was her own. 10 days later, Ethan finally recovered. The same day Caleb returned. He asked a few quick questions. "How is he now?" "Better, sir," Maggie answered. Caleb nodded and went straight into his study. He didn't know about the sleepless nights. He didn't know about the cold floor. He didn't know that someone else had stayed awake while he closed million-dollar deals. And he didn't remember something else. Something important. 1 month later, March 17th arrived. Ethan's 5th birthday. Amelia had been saving for weeks. Every extra dollar. Every tip. She spoke to Maggie quietly, asking what Ethan liked. What his mother used to do for him. She bought balloons. Decorations. A small cake. A present wrapped carefully in bright paper. When she reminded Caleb about the date, he nodded distractedly. "I'll handle it," he said. But on the morning of March 17th, he boarded a flight to Los Angeles for an urgent meeting. He forgot. That afternoon, Ethan walked through the house, searching. "Where's Daddy?" he asked. Amelia knelt beside him, her heart tightening. "He had something important, sweetheart," she said gently. Ethan nodded slowly. But the light in his eyes dimmed. That evening, Amelia and Maggie finished decorating the living room. Paper dragons hung from the ceiling. Colorful balloons covered the walls. And when Ethan walked in, his eyes widened in amazement. Then he laughed. The sound echoed through the mansion like sunlight breaking through clouds. Later that night, after the cake and stories, Amelia tucked him into bed. As she turned off the light, Ethan caught her hand. "Melia." "Yes, sweetheart." His voice was small in the dark. "I have a wish." "What is it?" A quiet pause. Then he whispered, "I wish you were my mommy." Amelia stood very still beside the bed. And in the silence that followed, Something inside her heart changed in a way she wasn't ready for. Amelia felt her throat tighten so suddenly she couldn't speak. In the dim light, Ethan's small fingers were still wrapped around hers, warm and trusting, as if he had already decided the answer in his heart. She knelt beside the bed and brushed his hair gently away from his forehead. "Sleep now," she whispered softly, her voice trembling just a little. "You need your rest, my brave boy." But Ethan didn't let go. "Would you stay?" he asked quietly. Amelia hesitated for only a second. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'll stay." Ethan relaxed almost immediately, his breathing slowing as his eyes closed. Within minutes, he was asleep, still holding her hand like he was afraid she might disappear. Amelia didn't move. She sat there in the quiet room, listening to his soft breathing, feeling the weight of his trust settle deep inside her chest. When she finally slipped her hand free and stood, her eyes were wet. She walked back to her room, closed the door gently behind her, and for the first time in years, she cried. Not from loneliness, not from pain, but from something that scared her even more. Love. Because she knew the truth. She wasn't just working here anymore. Her heart was already tied to that little boy, and hearts like hers had been broken before. The next morning, Caleb returned from Los Angeles. He walked into the house just after sunrise, loosening his tie, his expression tired and distant. Maggie met him in the entryway. "Welcome back, sir." He nodded briefly. "How's Ethan?" "He's fine," Maggie said. She paused. "Miss Brooks did a small birthday celebration for him yesterday." Caleb stopped. "Yesterday?" "Yes, sir. March 17th. For a moment, he didn't move. Then something unreadable passed across his face. "I see," he said quietly. He went straight upstairs. Ethan was sitting on the floor of his room, playing with the new toy Amelia had bought him. When he looked up and saw his father, his eyes lit up for a second. "Daddy, you're back." Caleb stepped inside, unsure how to respond to the sudden warmth. "Happy birthday," he said after a moment. Ethan smiled. "Melia made me a dragon party. There was cake and balloons and everything. It was the best birthday ever." Caleb nodded slowly. But as he stood there, something inside him felt heavy, because his son hadn't been waiting for him. He had already been taken care of. That evening, Caleb noticed something else. When he walked past the living room, Ethan was sitting on the couch beside Amelia, leaning against her shoulder while she read him a story. His small hand rested comfortably on her arm, like it belonged there. Caleb stood in the hallway longer than he intended. He didn't interrupt. He didn't speak. He just watched. And for the first time, the house didn't feel empty. But the feeling that followed wasn't relief. It was something more complicated. Gratitude. And something he didn't want to name. A few weeks later, a new routine had quietly settled into the house. Caleb began coming home earlier. Not intentionally at first. Just small changes. An hour earlier. Then 2. Some evenings, he even sat at the dinner table with Ethan and Amelia. The conversations were simple. How was school today? Did Draco fight any bad dragons? Ethan talked non-stop, and Amelia laughed easily, her voice warm and natural, never trying to impress, never trying to act like she belonged in a mansion. She just belonged. One night, as dinner ended, Ethan suddenly asked, "Daddy, why don't you smile much?" Caleb froze slightly. "I do smile," he said. Ethan shook his head. "You smile when Melia talks." The table went quiet. Amelia looked down quickly, her cheeks warming. Caleb cleared his throat. "Eat your vegetables," he muttered. But later that night, long after Ethan was asleep, he found himself standing outside the kitchen. Amelia was there alone, washing dishes. Her sleeves were rolled up. A few loose strands of hair had fallen around her face. She looked tired, but peaceful. For a moment, Caleb almost walked away. Instead, he stepped inside. "You don't have to do that," he said. Amelia turned, surprised. "Oh, it's fine. I don't mind." He leaned slightly against the counter. "You handled his birthday?" "Yes. Thank you." Amelia hesitated. He deserved something special. Caleb studied her for a long moment. "You paid for it yourself." It wasn't a question. She gave a small shrug. It wasn't much. There was a pause. Then he asked quietly, "Why?" Amelia didn't answer right away. Finally she said, "Because no child should feel forgotten on their birthday." The words settled between them. Simple, but heavy. Caleb looked at her differently after that. Not like an employee. Not like someone temporary. But like someone who understood something he had been trying to ignore. Days passed. Then one afternoon, while Amelia was in the garden with Ethan, something unexpected happened. A man climbed over the back fence. He moved clumsily, his eyes unfocused, his steps uneven. Drunk. Amelia reacted instantly. She pulled Ethan behind her. "Close your eyes," she whispered. The man staggered closer, muttering under his breath. "Money. Rich people got money." He shoved Amelia hard. She fell to the ground, her elbows scraping against the stone path. But she didn't let go of Ethan. She wrapped her arms around him, turning her body to shield him. "Don't look," she whispered again. Then footsteps thundered across the yard. "Caleb!" He had heard Ethan's cry from inside. What happened next was quick and brutal. Within seconds, the man was on the ground, restrained by security. Silence fell over the garden. Caleb rushed to them. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice sharper than usual. "I'm fine," Amelia said, though her arm was bleeding. His eyes dropped to the scrape. "That's not fine." Inside the house, he sat her down himself, cleaned the wound, wrapped the bandage carefully. His hands were steady, but his expression was darker than she had ever seen. "You protected him," he said quietly. Amelia looked at Ethan, who was still holding on to her. "Of course I did." Caleb didn't respond. But something shifted in his eyes. Something deeper. Something personal. And that night, long after everyone had gone to bed, he stood alone in his study, staring at the security footage from the garden, watching the moment Amelia fell, watching the way she covered his son with her body, like his life mattered more than her own. And for the first time, the powerful man who trusted no one began to ask himself a dangerous question. What if the one person he had hired to care for his son had quietly become the most important person in their lives? The question stayed with Caleb long after the security footage ended. He sat alone in the quiet study, the glow of the monitor fading, his reflection staring back at him from the dark screen. For years, his world had been simple. Trust no one. Feel nothing. Keep everything under control. But control was exactly what he was losing. Because Amelia wasn't just an employee anymore. She had stepped into spaces in his son's life, and somehow, without asking permission, she had stepped into his as well. The next morning, he came downstairs earlier than usual. Ethan was already at the table, swinging his legs under the chair while Amelia placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. "Careful, they're hot," she said. Ethan blew dramatically on one and grinned. Caleb stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. The scene looked ordinary, simple. But there was something about the way Ethan leaned toward her, the way Amelia wiped a small bit of syrup from his cheek without thinking, the way the boy didn't pull away. It looked like family. He stepped inside. "Morning," he said. Ethan's face lit up. "Daddy." Amelia made dragon pancakes. Amelia glanced at Caleb briefly. "Just regular pancakes," she said, a little embarrassed. "He named them." Caleb sat down at the table. For the first time in a long while, he didn't rush through his coffee. He stayed. And for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt careful. Later that week, something unexpected happened. Caleb returned home in the afternoon instead of late evening. As he walked through the living room, he heard laughter from the backyard. Real laughter. He stepped outside quietly. Ethan was running across the grass, chasing soap bubbles Amelia was blowing into the air. The boy jumped and missed them, laughing so hard he fell onto the lawn. "Again! Again!" he shouted. Amelia laughed too, shaking her head. "You're going to wear me out, kid." Ethan ran straight back and wrapped his arms around her legs. "Got you." She pretended to lose balance, dropping to her knees beside him. From the doorway, Caleb didn't move. Because in that moment, he realized something that unsettled him more than anything else. Ethan didn't just depend on Amelia. He loved her. And love, Caleb knew, was dangerous. Because love meant loss. Love meant the possibility that someone could walk away. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Caleb sat in the living room longer than usual. Amelia came down a few minutes later. "I finished his bedtime story," she said. He nodded. "Sit for a minute," he said quietly. She hesitated, then sat across from him. There was a long pause. Then Caleb asked, "How long do you plan to stay here?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "As long as he needs me." Caleb studied her. "And when he doesn't?" Amelia looked down at her hands. "Then I'll go wherever life takes me next." The answer was simple, but something about it tightened his chest. "You don't want something more permanent?" he asked. She gave a small smile. "Permanent things don't usually last for people like me." The words were soft, but there was no bitterness in her voice. Just experience. Caleb didn't respond. But later that night, those words stayed with him. Permanent things don't usually last. A few days later, the calm in the house was interrupted. Caleb was preparing to leave for work when Maggie approached him. "Sir," she said carefully, "there's a visitor asking for you." He frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone." "She says it's important." Caleb walked into the main living room. And stopped. A woman stood near the window, her back to him. Tall, elegant, perfectly dressed. When she turned, a confident smile curved across her lips. "Hello, Caleb." Her voice was smooth, familiar, and unwelcome. "Veronica," he said flatly. She walked toward him like she belonged there. "It's been a long time." Caleb didn't move. "What are you doing here?" Veronica glanced around the room casually. "I heard you've been keeping to yourself these days. Thought you might need some company." Her eyes moved past him, and then she saw Amelia, who had just stepped into the hallway after hearing the voices. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Veronica's smile didn't fade, but something sharp appeared behind it. "And who is this?" she asked lightly. Caleb answered before Amelia could speak. "She works here." Veronica looked Amelia up and down slowly. "Of course she does." The tone wasn't loud, but it was cutting. Amelia felt it. The difference between their worlds. The expensive dress. The perfect hair. The confidence of someone who had never worried about rent or groceries or what tomorrow might look like. Veronica turned back to Caleb. "We should talk privately." Caleb nodded once. As they walked toward the study, Veronica spoke softly, but loud enough for Amelia to hear. "You always did have a habit of bringing strangers into your home." The door closed behind them. In the hallway, Amelia stood very still. Maggie stepped beside her quietly. "Don't let her get to you," she whispered. "Who is she?" Amelia asked. Maggie sighed. "She's someone from Mr. Thornton's past." Inside the study, Veronica didn't sit. She walked slowly around the room like she was inspecting it. "You've changed the place," she said. "I haven't," Caleb replied. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Then something else has." She turned to face him. "I hear you've been spending a lot more time at home." "I have a son," Caleb said. Veronica smiled faintly. "And a nanny." The word lingered in the air. "She seems very comfortable here." Caleb's expression hardened. "She takes care of Ethan." Veronica stepped closer. "You always were sentimental when it came to your family." Her voice softened. "But be careful, Caleb." He didn't respond. She lowered her voice even more. "Poor girls don't come into rich houses without a reason." The words landed quietly, but they stayed. And as Veronica walked toward the door, she added one last sentence. "People like her don't fall in love with children, Caleb." She paused. "They fall in love with opportunities." The door closed behind her. And for the first time since Amelia had entered his life, a seed of doubt began to grow. Caleb stood alone in the study long after Veronica left. Her words should have been easy to dismiss. He knew her. He knew the way she thought, the way she measured people by power and advantage. He knew she saw the world like a chessboard. And yet, the doubt didn't leave. Because doubt didn't come from her. It came from fear. Fear that he had been wrong before. Fear that he might be wrong again. Fear that someone could come close to his son, and then leave. That evening, he found himself watching Amelia more carefully. Not openly. Quietly. From a distance. She was in the living room with Ethan, helping him build a cardboard castle from a large delivery box. "No, the dragon goes here," Ethan insisted, placing a crayon drawing on the front. Amelia laughed softly. "If the dragon guards the door, how will the knights get inside?" "They have to knock," Ethan said seriously. Caleb stood near the staircase, unnoticed. There was no performance in her movements. No effort to impress. No glance toward the hallway to see if anyone was watching. Just patience. Just warmth. Still, Veronica's voice lingered. "Poor girls don't come into rich houses without a reason." The next morning, Caleb made a quiet decision. He asked his security team to run a full background check on Amelia. It wasn't personal, he told himself. It was responsibility. Protection. But when he gave the order, something inside him didn't feel right. For the first time since she had arrived, he was looking at her not as someone he trusted, but as someone he needed to verify. Days passed. Nothing changed on the surface. Ethan continued to follow Amelia everywhere, talking endlessly about dragons, clouds, and the school he wanted her to build one day for kids who didn't have families. Amelia listened like every dream he spoke mattered. But something had changed in Caleb. His tone became more formal, more distant. He no longer lingered in the kitchen at night. He no longer stayed at the table after dinner. Amelia noticed. She didn't ask, but she noticed. One evening, as she was helping Ethan with a puzzle, he looked up suddenly. "Did Daddy get mad at you?" The question surprised her. "Why would he be mad at me?" Ethan shrugged. "He doesn't smile at you anymore." Amelia forced a gentle smile. "Your dad just has a lot on his mind." But later that night, after Ethan fell asleep, she stood alone in the kitchen for a long time. because the warmth that had slowly grown in the house was fading again. 2 days later, the background report arrived. Caleb opened it in his study. Everything was there. Her childhood, the orphanage, the low-paying jobs, the college degree, the debt left by her former boyfriend. Nothing hidden, nothing suspicious, nothing calculated. Just a life that had been difficult from the beginning. At the bottom of the file was a small note from the investigator. No financial assets. No family connections. No legal issues. Subject appears financially unstable but has consistent employment history and positive references from previous childcare positions. Caleb read that line twice. Financially unstable. Veronica's voice echoed again. Opportunity. That evening, he noticed something else. Amelia was standing near the entry table, looking through a small jewelry catalog that had come in the mail. When she heard his footsteps, she closed it quickly. "It's nothing," she said. But Caleb had already seen the page. A silver necklace. Expensive. Too expensive. The seed of doubt grew deeper. The next morning, something else happened. Caleb received a message from Veronica. Attached was a photo. Amelia standing outside a high-end jewelry store downtown. The timestamp was from the previous afternoon. The message below it was short. "Still think she's here for your son?" Caleb stared at the image for a long time. That afternoon, when Amelia returned from taking Ethan to the park, he was waiting in the living room. "Where were you yesterday afternoon?" he asked. The tone made her pause. "I took Ethan to the park. Then we stopped by the grocery store." He held up his phone. "And after that?" She looked at the photo. Her face changed slightly. "I went to a store," she said quietly. "What kind of store?" "A jewelry store." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Caleb's voice stayed calm. "Why?" Amelia hesitated. "I was looking at something. For yourself." She shook her head. But she didn't explain further. And that silence was enough. Caleb's expression hardened. "I think it's important we keep things professional moving forward," he said. The words landed like a door closing. Amelia's eyes widened slightly. "I've always been professional." "I'm sure you have," he replied. "But this is still a job." A long pause. Then he added quietly, "And jobs have boundaries." She stood there, very still. "Did I cross one?" Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, the distance between rich and poor, between employer and employee, stood clearly between them. That night, Ethan refused to eat. He pushed his plate away and climbed into Amelia's lap instead. "Are you leaving?" he whispered. Her heart tightened. "No," she said softly. But as she looked across the room at Caleb, for the first time since she arrived, she wasn't sure if that was still true. Upstairs, long after the house went quiet, Caleb stood alone in his study again. The photo still glowed on his phone. The report sat open on his desk. Everything logical told him he was being careful, responsible, protective. But deep down, another voice whispered something else. What if the person he was pushing away was the one person his son couldn't afford to lose? The question stayed with him. But the doubt stayed stronger. And the next morning, Caleb made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, Caleb called Amelia into his study. She stood near the door, hands folded in front of her, already sensing what was coming. There was no anger in her face. No defensiveness. Just quiet hurt. "I think it's best if we end your employment," Caleb said. His voice was calm, controlled, professional. "We'll provide a full month's pay. And a recommendation." The words sounded clean. Reasonable. But Amelia's fingers tightened slightly. "May I ask why?" she said softly. Caleb hesitated. "This arrangement has become too personal. For Ethan. For you. For this house." She nodded slowly. "I see." There were 1,000 things she could have said. About the sleepless nights. The birthday he forgot. The way Ethan clung to her like she was the only safe place he had left. But she didn't say any of it. Because poor people learn early that sometimes dignity is the only thing they're allowed to keep. "When should I leave?" she asked. "Today would be best." A long silence filled the room. Then Amelia reached into her bag and placed a small box on his desk. "I was going to give this to Ethan on his next birthday," she said quietly. "But maybe it's better if you keep it." Caleb frowned slightly and opened the box. Inside was the silver necklace he had seen in the catalogue. A small star pendant. On the back, engraved in careful letters, "My brave little star." Caleb's chest tightened. "I've been saving for months," Amelia continued. "He told me once that his mom watches him from the clouds. I thought, maybe he could wear a little star close to his heart." She swallowed. "I didn't buy anything for myself." The room went very still. But Amelia didn't wait for his reaction. "I'll pack my things," she said, and quietly left the study. By afternoon, her small suitcase stood by the door. Maggie was crying openly. "This house just found its heart again," she whispered. "And now it's losing it." Amelia hugged her gently. "Take care of him," Maggie pleaded. "I always will," Amelia said. Upstairs, Ethan was drawing at his little desk. When Amelia walked in, he looked up and smiled. "Melia, look. I made Draco a family." She knelt beside him, her hands shaking slightly. "That's beautiful." "I made you, me, and Daddy," he said proudly. Her throat closed. "Sweetheart, I have to go away for a little while." Ethan blinked. "Where?" "Just somewhere else for work." His smile faded. "Did I do something bad?" The question broke her. "No," she whispered, pulling him close. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "Then why are you leaving?" She couldn't answer. So she just held him. And when she finally stood to walk out, Ethan ran after her. But Caleb was already at the front door. He handed her an envelope. "Thank you for your service," he said. The words sounded cold. Formal. Amelia took the envelope. She didn't look at him. And then she walked out. That evening, the mansion was quiet again. But it wasn't peaceful. It was empty. At dinner, Ethan didn't touch his food. "Where's Melia?" he asked. "She's not coming back," Caleb said. Ethan stared at him. "Why?" "It was her job." The boy's small hands clenched. "You fired her?" Caleb didn't answer. Ethan pushed his chair back so hard it fell. "I hate you," he shouted, his voice breaking. "You send everyone away. First Mommy, now Melia." He ran upstairs, slamming the door. That night, he cried until his voice turned hoarse. And for the first time since Catherine died, Caleb sat outside his son's room and listened. Really listened. To the pain. To the loneliness. To the same emptiness he had lived with for 2 years. Downstairs, the small star necklace still sat on his desk. Caleb picked it up. And for the first time, he opened the security report again. This time, he read every page. The orphanage. The night jobs. The debt she was still paying. The references that all said the same thing. She stays. Even when it's hard. Then he saw something he had missed. A note from a previous employer. turned down a higher-paying position because the child she cared for had separation anxiety. Caleb sat very still. And suddenly, Veronica's words didn't sound sharp anymore. They sounded small. The next morning, before sunrise, Caleb drove to the address listed in Amelia's file. A small apartment building. Old. Worn. He knocked. When the door opened, Amelia looked surprised. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Caleb didn't speak right away. Then, slowly, the most powerful man in Chicago did something no one had ever seen him do. He lowered his head. "I was wrong," he said. Amelia stared at him. "I let fear speak louder than truth. I saw your poverty and thought it meant you needed something from me." His voice broke slightly. "But you were the only one who gave something to us." Silence filled the doorway. "Ethan hasn't eaten," Caleb said quietly. "He didn't sleep. He keeps asking for you." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't come to hire you back," Caleb continued. "I came to ask you, please come home." She looked at him for a long moment. Not at his suit. Not at the car. At the man. At the father. At the fear and regret in his eyes. "On one condition," she said softly. "Anything. You never make that boy feel abandoned again." Caleb nodded immediately. "I promise." That evening, when the front door opened, Ethan was sitting on the stairs. He didn't believe what he was seeing. "Amelia!" Amelia opened her arms. He ran to her so fast he almost fell. "I thought you left me," he cried. "I'm here," she whispered. "And I'm staying." From the hallway, Caleb watched quietly. And for the first time in years, the house felt like a home again. Because in the end, it wasn't money that saved them. It wasn't power. It wasn't pride. It was the simple truth that changed everything. The poorest person in the room had given the richest family the one thing money could never buy: love. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and tell me in the comments which region you're watching from. Your support helps us share more stories about love, hope, and the power of kindness.